Thanks, Emily. Hi, everybody. I'm Rena Klein. As you can see from this slide, I've been involved in this practice for quite a while. I had a firm in Seattle for about 25 years, after which I transitioned, went back to school during my years of practice just to improve and understand how to run my business better. And over time, I started consulting and helping other people and writing my book on small firm management, and also was executive editor of the AIA's Architect's Handbook of Professional Practice, the 15th edition. And about 3 years ago, I joined CVG and am now the VP of Investment Partnerships, which just means that along with my colleagues and team members at CVG, we are actively helping as partners all the firms that we're working with, and I help coordinate that. Today, we're going to focus on ownership, expansions, transitions, leadership changes, all the kinds of things that happen as founders or even second generation firm leaders begin to get older and think about how their firms can continue and have a legacy for the future. This slide was prepared by my friend and colleague, Michael Strugoff, to kind of illustrate all the different aspects that come into play when you're thinking about ownership and leadership transition. And I will be discussing in kind of at a very high level all of these things, talking about the mechanics of ownership transition, talking about the nature of leadership in an architectural firm and how people can be identified as potential leaders and successors for your firm. And then, of course, the governance, how you think about decision making, roles and responsibilities, the bylaws of your organization, and how you create an agreement with your new partners to govern the firm. So beginning with talking a little bit about the general ways that architectural firms move over time, the life cycle of a firm. And what we see is that, you know, in the first few years, businesses go up and down with the business cycle. The general usual business cycle that we have, not exactly what we're involved in right now, but up and down with that until after about 15 years or so, they begin to have a more mature practice that's stabilized. They have a stable team, they have reliable consultants, they have a good client base. And that can go on for quite a few years, but after about 25, 30 years, there's usually the beginning of a decline. You know, your steady clients are getting older too, all kinds of things change. And if the founder or the principal of the firm hasn't shared value, the firm may have little value, hasn't shared leadership, I'm sorry. The firm may have little value when you come to this point, and it may not be possible to transition because you don't have an entity that actually has value as a business entity. But for some firms in that 15 to 25 year period in the middle of the practice, they cultivate second generation leadership. They share decision-making and responsibility with other people, and they begin to be able to create value in their firm that goes beyond their individual person. I mean, I tried to sell my firm when I was transitioning, but because it was all about, you know, me and my leadership and my skills and connections, I really couldn't do that. And it was a surprise to me. So understanding that developing second generation leadership is the way to move towards creating value and having a legacy for your firm. However, you know, many of us find that difficult to do. And I just wanted to put this matrix up because researchers have shown that founders or principals that are willing to share leadership actually end up wealthier and have bigger organizations than those who don't. And not to say that there's anything wrong with being, you know, your own, being the king or queen of your realm. You know, there's nothing wrong with doing that. It just means it's going to put a limit to growth. You probably won't be able to grow beyond 8 or maybe 10 if you have good administrative support. But there's just a limit, because after a certain point in growth, you just can't know everything that's going on. So, you know, sharing leadership is important, but you have to know yourself. If you're more comfortable being in control of everything that goes on, then have a smaller organization and understand that when you come to the end of your career, you may just have to close your firm. You may have no one to pass that on to. But you know, most of us might be closer to the middle of this continuum, or even towards the right end of, you know, enjoying democratic management, enjoying passing on responsibility and leadership to the other people that we're around, mentoring instead of doing. The important thing here is to know yourself and construct your firm and its future based on your understanding of this continuum. Now, there are challenges, even if you want to share leadership and want to, you know, build the value of your firm and grow your firm beyond what you can do yourself. And one of the biggest challenges is that we have a lack of candidates to pass on to, for baby boomer founders anyway, to pass on to their firm. Because the generation, Gen X, is a very small generation, half the size of the boomers and half the size of the millennials. So there just aren't that many of them. And you can see from this chart about the workforce that the number of Gen X's in the workforce really hasn't changed a lot over the last couple of decades, because there's just not that many of them. Whereas millennials have continued to increase, and of course, baby boomers have decreased somewhat over the decades leading up to now. The other challenges have to do with that generally, and this isn't always true, of course, isn't true of everyone, but generally the Gen X generation is a little more risk averse than some of the people who are younger or older than them. I'm not going to talk about why that might be, just generally that's what surveys show. Also, affordability for the new owners. You know, if your firm is really successful and you have built it and you have shared leadership, it may be that the potential successors just don't have the money to buy your firm. So there are challenges there. And on the other end of the spectrum, if you have low profitability, your firm hasn't really gained any value. So you might be able to sell it to or pass it on to successors, but you may not really gain any monetary value from that. And then the biggest thing, of course, is a lack of planning. You know, if you've got 10 years before you're thinking about retiring or changing leadership in your firm, you know, you're in a good position. If you're less than 10 years, you know, your choices begin to reduce. So let's talk for a minute about these potential successors. And about yourself if you're in a leadership position. And again, this is a slide from Michael Strogoff. And I think that these traits it's a very nice comprehensive list of all the kinds of things that are important in leadership. You know, obviously everybody's not going to have all of these, but, and you don't need all of these to be a good leader, but understanding your strengths and the really critical ones of these for your organization and your successors is really critical. And there's more than just traits, there's also behaviors, because you may not be strong in a certain area, but you can learn to behave in certain ways that are effective for you as a leader. So, you know, one of them is bringing other people around you who have good judgment and can help you where you're weak. So, you know, you're as a leader, and for your successors as well, this is all about creating a culture that emphasizes excellence, um, performance, and with a universal understanding of the vision, you know, where you're taking your firm. Now, your successors may have new ideas and new directions that they want to take your firm in, and that's a really positive thing, but there needs to be a conversation and discussion and a unity about that as you move forward. Now, as we look at the choices that are facing people as they think about ownership transition, you know, I go back to this notion that your choices are different whether if you're a person that has singular control of your firm or a person who has shared that control. If you have singular control and you have about 10 years left, you might identify, hire a successor or a very experienced person who might become a potential successor. If you have a desirable market or a niche knowledge base or location, then you might be able to sell your firm externally or merge with another firm that's interested in the niche market you've created. If you only have about 2 years left or so, you may have to just close your firm, in which case your situation may be different, whether you have significant savings from your firm or from other investments, or whether you don't. Now, if you have shared leadership, if you've developed value of your firm as a business entity, then you have, similar, but probably more choices, more opportunity to actually receive payments during your retirement years, or to do a phased retirement where you're being paid for working as you slow down or just want to do a little less. So if you have shared leadership, you may have some successors identified, and you might be able to create a succession plan in 2 to 5 years. And if it's a profitable firm, you're likely to have some benefit from that over time. If it's not, you probably will work until you feel like you don't want to do that anymore. Now, this isn't the only criteria, though. There are others, and the other main criteria you might call design criteria as you're thinking about ownership transition is, how much time do you have, just simply. And if you have 5 to 10 years, you have a lot of opportunity, you have a lot of possibilities. If you have a successor or you can develop them, you can go for an internal sale. If you don't have a successor, you could hire one, or you can think about merging. And if you're in a niche market and location, and I keep saying that over and over again, because external sales are probably not an option unless you have a unique market position that somebody else would like to acquire in order to enter that market. And that could be about your location, it could be about your skill set, it could be about your client base, but not every firm is going to be in a position to be acquired. Now, if you have 5 to 7 years, you're probably not going to be able to develop a successor in that period of time. Maybe, again, if you have a niche market, you might be able to do an external sale. But understand that if you do an external sale, or if you merge with another firm, you're likely to have to keep working in that new firm, in the merged firm, or in the firm that has been acquired, because usually they want the leadership of the firm to continue to gain the benefit of buying that firm, because usually it doesn't have as much benefit without the firm leaders. So you're not going to be able to, an external sale, if you only have 2 years before you want to retire, it's less likely. Although, if your firm is really attractive, never say never, it could happen, but it's certainly less likely. So if you have 2 to 5 years and you have a successor, you could probably accomplish an internal sale by then. If you have no successor, you're probably in a situation where you're going to have to think about closing your firm and the processes of doing that. And by the way, that's not without expense or without challenges, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So I wanted to discuss a little bit about the difference between thinking about an external transition, which really involves a merger or a sale, and an internal transition to a successor that you've groomed and could really carry on your legacy. In internal transitions, generally the principal will regain control, will maintain control a little bit longer, or the founder. When you're bought out or acquired in external transition, how much control the leader has depends. There's more continuity. You have the opportunity to reward key employees. You basically have a little bit more control over your transition. An external sale, you might make more money, or you might get opportunities to do things you never did before. But you probably are giving up control more quickly. The challenges are kind of the flip side of all of this. For external sales, it's often difficult to find the right buyer, and you probably want to have a third party be doing that for you, to reach out to possible people with you staying anonymous. You don't really want it to be out in your professional community or to your clients that you're thinking about doing this until you're ready to announce it. So it wants to be kind of a quiet process where you are reaching out through a third party, reaching out to people who might be interested. For internal transition, it's usually a longer time frame. There's more risk involved because, will the firm continue doing as well as it did without the founder? Candidates are hard to find. Sometimes even after they begin to be junior partners and they realize what it really means to be an owner, they have cold feet and don't want to continue. And also with some firms, it's hard to make the case of return on investment. You're going to be, because it's, there's a lot of risk involved in our field, as we learn over and over again. But I wanted to show you a case study of a successful transition, which is actually more like a merger of two firms where they created the strength of each firm, and it's kind of a nice positive tale of a partner, of a founder who has 5 to 10 years to retire and has no successor identified, and has a firm that has gone through a whole lot of different challenges over the years. In the 90s and the 2000s, this firm had grown to about 15 people, and then the Great Recession reduced it to about 8. Before the Great Recession, Chris had another partner. He left, and he's been the sole owner since 2015. And he was really thinking hard about his future and how to make it work, and he really wanted to merge with another firm, to either hire a successor or merge with a firm that was a little bit younger than him. And this is like the unicorn scenario, finding somebody who's like this, who has local roots and connections, who has an ongoing client base, not that easy. Although honestly, they probably exist in every single market, because there's so many sole proprietors. 25% of our firms are run by one person, are just one person. So, you know, there are people out there that could potentially merge and expand and strengthen a firm. And amazingly, Chris found somebody like that who is in person of Sloan Mayer, who was working in the same community as UKA, but had a one-person residential practice, you know, grew up there, not quite 10 years younger than Chris, so that isn't perfect, but pretty much everything else is. And she was contacted. Chris wasn't the first person to contact her about merging, but so she, you know, was open to new possibilities, wanted to think about how her firm could expand as well. And so Chris and Sloan decided to merge. Oops, let me go back a minute. They decided to merge in 2018 and, you know, completed the merger in 2019. It started by Sloan working for Chris part-time and then beginning to bring in her firms until they finally decided to create a formal ownership transition plan. And as with all plans, this has to start with a firm valuation. And I really want to recommend, especially if you have a little larger firm, recommend that you get a professional evaluation, a professional firm valuation by somebody who knows the industry. And I mentioned Michael Strogoff before, showing you some of his slides. Strogoff Consulting does valuation, and of course there's other organizations like that who do that, but I suggest you find somebody who's in the industry rather than, say, your accountant to do this for you. But in the meantime, and by the way, that costs a little bit of money, you know, it could be $5,000 to $7,000 depending on how big your firm is. But this is a kind of quick and dirty way of doing it, which is to look at the book value on your balance sheet. And for internal sales, we're talking about 1.25 times the book value, or 1.5 times the book value in some cases. And the book value is your assets minus your liabilities. Basically, it's if you had to liquidate your firm, sell everything you own, call in all your debts, finish all your work, pay off all your other, you know, everything you owe, this is what would be left. And the margin, the 1.5 or the 2 in the case of an external sale, represents your goodwill, because your things, your assets, you know, doesn't really represent the reputation and goodwill and client base that you have. So that's what the multiplier does. So here's an outline of the things that, you know, assets are: your receivables, your work in progress, cash that you have, all your furniture and stuff, balanced against your liabilities, any taxes or payroll you might owe, your line of credit balances, anything you might owe to consultants. All those things are liabilities subtracted from the assets. Book value is what's left. And in the case of UK Architects and Sloan Mayer Architects, UK's, based on this formula, UK's using 1.5 times their book value, UK's came at 142,000 and Sloan's SMA at 58,000, which, you know, just do the math, is worth 400 shares of UKA. So starting in this January, Sloan became an owner, a 40% owner of UKA, which is now known as Make Architects, because they've got CVG, this is a CVG partner firm, and we've rebranded them, and now they're Make Architects, and I'm sorry I didn't put their new logo in here. I should have, so my apologies. But here is the kind of technical aspects or behind the scenes, very general sort of spreadsheets used to think about how this ownership transition is going to complete until eventually Sloan is the 100% owner of Make Architects, and Chris has retired over the years. Now he may still work after this 5-year period for Make, but he'll be paid as an employee, not an owner. You can see that as of January 1st, whoops, I got these dates different, but as of January 1st through the year of 2020, Sloan will be a 60%, 40% owner of the firm. And then as we go through the years, her ownership increases until finally, at the end of 2024, she's 100% owner of Make Architects. Now, the other thing this shows you is the value of these firms of these shares based on the value of UKA. Now, you'll notice here that the value is staying stable through all 5 years, but often that value is adjusted, and that firms get a re-evaluation done at the end of every year. And if you have a professional valuation done, it's not so much to update it every year on January 1st, and then the value of the shares would change every year. So the value of the shares purchased would also change. And that is probably a better way to reflect the actual performance of the firm. And it's like having a stock in the stock market. You know, if the performance of the firm goes down, the value of your shares go down, what you owe to pay for new shares goes down, and the vice versa too. If it really succeeds, goes up. But some firms decide to keep it stable, just to make a fixed price for the shares, and that's what they did here. Then we try to think about, how do these shares get paid for? And in the best of all worlds, the shares get paid for out of the distributions, a share of the profit share of the new owner. So this is a pro forma that shows the change in ownership percentage over the years, and the amount of the cost of the shares over each of those years as Sloan gains more, and what she should pay each of those years to get up to the total of $85,000. Now, when we look at these numbers, the first year Sloan would owe $14,000, but she's only getting $11,000 estimated in net distributions. So she's in the red here, and that continues on for all of these 4 years where she's paying. So in many cases, the way to deal with that is to spread out the payments over many more years and make them even payments over those years. So they decided to do these payments over an 8-year period. So by the end of this 8-year period, she's actually, whoops, sorry. Oops, wrong direction. Sorry about that. She's actually paid this all off in a way that, for the most part, is covered by her distributions. So at the end of 8 years, her total distributions, because she gets to be 100% for the last 4 years, are up at $143,000. Her stock payments, $87,000, and she actually has a positive cash flow. So we look at these things to see whether distributions can pay for the shares bought, whether there's actually a positive cash flow after a period of years. In other words, a return on investment, right? So Sloan invests $87,000, she gets back $55,000 of that as a return on investment after 8 years. Of course, if we extended this out further, she would get a higher return because now she's 100% owner of the firm. So this is the mechanics, this is the arithmetic that we use to try to create a transition roadmap that makes it affordable for the person who's buying in. And often that takes a little work to do. either extending the payment time, possibly discounting the price of the firm, and there are a number of legal ways of doing that, or asking the person who's buying in to put a little bit of a down payment, and then, or sometimes that can be through salary increases or bonuses, all these mechanisms so that you don't have to have out-of-pocket money going into to afford this firm. So I've said a lot. Any questions coming in on this just yet?
I have one. In case of small design firms that are transitioning permanently to remote work environments and possibly all, whereby all former W-2 staff becoming 1099 consultants reduce assets, do you believe that such a firm is viable for ownership transition, specifically purchase, in any of the models?
I think so. We're all dealing with this new reality, but anybody can buy your firm. An outside person can buy your firm. So the fact that they're 1099 employees doesn't really change their status. However, if they actually buy into their firm, they're no longer that. Obviously, they're owners, and they need to have salaries or guarantee payments or draws that come from the firm. And so it changes their status, but I think I don't think it would change the ability of someone to buy in significantly. I do think, though, that that if you're really considering someone as a successor, that even through these times you may want to keep them on salary and as an employee, just because you're talking about commitment to the firm, a leadership role for these people, which is less culturally less real as a 1099 employee, I think. So if you can, even if it means reducing somebody's salary because they can only work 30 hours a week from home, that might be better in certain cases where you're highly valued potential successor employees, to keep them on that status rather than make them contract workers. So
I guess also I might attempt to clarify this question a little bit. Okay. What you might be asking also is, what is the real value of a firm if there isn't the component of the stuff and the remote, or the workers are contract workers, and the valuation might not be, it would be very hard to ascertain, right? Because there isn't a traditional model. So then how attractive is it for purchase by another entity? Maybe not even an employee, but just another entity.
Well, that's a good question. Let me go back to this slide. I think that you can develop value in a remote work environment through many of these things, like accounts receivable, value of work, cash on hand. Obviously, the value of furniture and equipment might be reduced if you're not having as big a physical office, but you still have remote equipment. You might be supplying the desktops or laptops to your employees, so you still have that. You still have backlog. So all of those assets are still in place. In some of the valuation formulas, they count number of employees, and they also, of course, count revenue, your revenue stream, as a major component in valuation calculations. So if you don't have any more employees, or if number of employees are the same, whether they're remote, whoops. Oh dear. So I'm going to stop my share for a second. See if I can get that back up. But if you're getting a professional valuation, I think there's a lot of things that would still be the same, whether it's remote or not.
Okay. And another question: in addition to working with CVG on a transition roadmap, does one need to separately involve an attorney of some specialization? It's a good question.
Yes, and I'll be talking about that a little bit soon when we talk about the shareholder agreement. But in every process, you are going to need to have an attorney and possibly your accountant's involvement too, because these term sheets and the pro formas that I've just shown you, and even the leadership agreement framework are just frameworks. And then you have to go to an accountant or your attorney to develop a buy-sell agreement, essentially, that outlines in legal terms exactly what each person's obligation in this agreement would be.
Okay.
So, yes.
And another question, do you have an example, or can you speak about a buyout situation when there are multiple partners?
Yes, when, this, oops, getting the directions wrong in this constantly. When there are multiple partners, of course, you have, more people in this roadmap, right? You may have future owner 1, future owner 2, future owner 3, and you may have many more years involved and the percentages of each of them, rising periodically. You may have future owner 1 coming in the first couple of years and future owner 2 the next few, and so forth. So these roadmaps can exist for as many owners as you want and as far to the future as you want, but and we link them to the pro forma so that these are opposite to the way it goes. So we link this to the pro forma, so as you change the roadmap, the pro forma can change, and we can see what implications for return on investment, cash flow, amounts owned each year by each shareholder can be put in. So yes, all that can be done, but it gets more and more complicated. Another question of this?
Yeah, asked by the classic niche firm would like to be acquired or merge with a firm. The value of my firm is my deep experience in this niche, over 70 projects and name recognition. I only work part-time now, so my firm is not particularly profitable in the usual way. What's my best route?
Well, I think that since you're in a niche market and you are the holder of most of the knowledge and more like an expertise firm, that looking for an acquisition or a merger, hiring a consultant or a third-party person to help you do that search, just like you might with a, looking for an employee would be good. And as a niche market, I don't know what discipline you're in, but if you're, a landscape architect or an engineer or something, there might be a multidisciplinary firm that is interested in acquiring you to bring that knowledge into your firm. But you have to be prepared to work for another 2 to 5 years minimum because they're going to want you to transfer your knowledge, your connections, your client base to somebody else in their organization. But you may have even though you haven't been highly profitable, your knowledge may be very valuable to somebody. So that might be the important direction.
Yeah, 2 questions about resources. One is, what are some resources for attaining a valuation? And then another follow-up would be, who would you find to be a broker, if you were interested in buying or selling?
Well, honestly, any consultant that does ownership transition or merger and acquisition can help you with being your agent, your broker, essentially, to try to find somebody. For valuation, I've been recommending Michael Strogoff, who I showed on some of these slides. Strogoff Consulting out of the Bay Area is really excellent, but there are others around that do it as well, other consultants. CVD doesn't do it, but we do help with mergers and acquisitions and that kind of thing. Other questions?
I'm not.
Okay, so I'll go on. So wanted to talk a little bit about shareholder agreement framework. And, as I said, this will be the framework that you would present to your attorney to create a buy-sell agreement. And you don't, because attorneys are expensive, you don't necessarily need them to work out all of these agreements. If you have a framework like this, you can discuss this with your new partners or your existing partners, and some of you may not even have a shareholder agreement among your current partners. So it's something to think about. So you have a normative understanding among everybody about how you're going to approach things as you move forward. So the sales price and purchase will already be figured out, but how you're going to do distribution of profits, something you should discuss. Like, will it be by percentage of shares or ownership in an LLC, or will it be by everybody gets the same amount, or will it be by how much work you brought in? Some firms have very, very complicated formulas for distributions, and it's something you need to discuss. And whatever formula you come up with, you're going to want to use it if your firm is losing money and you need to put in capital contributions. Owners have to do that sometimes too. You want to talk about not competing, non-solicitation agreements. You don't want your partners doing work, moonlighting for somebody else, or doing work that doesn't relate to your organization. Who owns the intellectual property if your new partner is bringing stuff in from another firm, being very clear about attribution, and again, if there's an exiting, that becomes very important as well. The powers and duties of the shareholders, who gets to make what decisions, who's in charge of what, how can you mete out the roles and responsibilities that are part of leadership. You always have to talk about exit possibilities, dispute resolution processes, how you would bring somebody in. All of these kinds of things need to be part of a shareholder agreement. Part of that is understanding organizational design, and sometimes doing things in graphic form. For us as architects, we can understand things better. So I really encourage you to try to diagram your organization and see about who's doing what and who do you want to do what. And if you're a founder that's beginning to do less and less, who's going to take over the parts of the firm that you're currently doing. So just to summarize, we're going to look at just quickly the basic options, step by step: firm closure, internal sale, external sale. For firm closure, basically, you have to have a plan for your existing projects and to downsize the staff incrementally. And you might actually have to offer them incentives to stay with you, because if they see things are winding down, they're like, okay, I'm looking for a job elsewhere, and there's lots of opportunities. So, be upfront. Let people know what you're doing and see if you can help them make their transition easier. Tail end insurance, meaning after you retire or close your firm, your projects will be covered for X period of time, and it's kind of expensive. So you might want to plan for that. And then of course you'll liquidate your assets, collect all your receivables, and close the legal entity of your firm. For the internal sale, you'll need to acquire a valuation first. You'll need to share your firm financials and discuss options with potential firm owners. You need to develop the ownership transition roadmap. And before you start working with someone who can help you with that, it's really a matter of just thinking about how long you have, how quickly you want to divest your ownership, and for incoming shareholders, how quickly they want to take on responsibility of leadership and ownership. and then drafting the shareholders framework. And then for external sales, you have to begin the search. And when you find somebody you're interested in, you have to discuss your leadership roles and responsibilities. It's really, really common for principals and firms that are being acquired, honestly, to be really unhappy because they're just not in the same position that they were before. So as much as you can do to negotiate, where you still have leadership control and responsibility and what's going to be taken over by the new organization is really important. You have a buy-sell agreement, and as you do that, it's really important that you have your own attorney, that you don't just accept what you're being posed to. And of course, that's important if you're in an internal sale too, for buyers, for potential buyers or new partners to have their own attorney in this process as well. So here's a summary, and I think that being realistic about your firm's value is really important. A lot of firm owners have a really unrealistic sense of what their firm is worth. It's easy, it's your baby, you grew it, but you really have to be realistic about that, and getting an outside opinion is really helpful. Making a plan, planning 10 years ahead as much as you can, that's the key. So any final question or any questions? I think we're
we have another question. I work for a small firm, which is a husband and wife, one admin, one drafter, and me as an architect. My boss talked to me about possibly passing the business to me in ideally 2 years. Do you have an example of a very small firm transition? I was considering starting my own firm until my boss brought up this opportunity, but I still don't know what I'm buying since some of his contacts are retiring too. He has a good reputation. We see this a lot.
Yeah, it's really pretty common. And what I would say is, yes, I mean, the example I gave in this slide is actually a very small firm, kind of, similar to the kind of transition that you're thinking about. Got to have the valuation first. You've got to ask the owner to share the financials with you, to talk about his or her plans to, time frame and what they're looking for. You need to get a professional valuation, and you need to get some professional advice. A consultant or an attorney that can help you, not just the firm. Yeah. And I think that often in these very closely held kind of situations, it can really be just a friendly negotiation. I mean, I showed you all these spreadsheets for Chris and Sloan, but when it came down to it, they just talked it over and made an agreement. And that's likely what you would do with your person who you're working for now.
What about a good resource for liability insurance and transferring it?
I don't really have one of those except for your current insurance company, and or AIA Trust, actually, come to think of it, probably does if you're an AIA member, or even if you're not. I think it's accessible. AIA Trust has a lot of information about insurance, and I'm sure that they have information about tail insurance and also brokers that they recommend.
Great. Any other questions? I posted a link to a direct calendar a spot where you can schedule with us in the chat window. So if you have any other questions and/or just want to share your story, get advice on anything regarding your business, please, we'd love to talk to you, and follow that link for that. Also, we have another webinar on Friday about, it's a public webinar. We're going to be talking about business development in COVID-19 and kind of best practices or ideas and tips, and get your questions about that. So that's, you can register for that on the Charrette Venture Group website. Go to news and you'll see all of our upcoming events, and you can register there. Any last minute questions? Not seeing any pop up.
Well,
Thank you so much, Rena.
Thank you, and thanks to everybody for coming, and please contact me if you have any other questions.
Great, thanks everyone.